Before I go on, I want to define the word contentment. I'm sure you know what it means, but just for the sake of the sermon, I'd like to define what it means. Contentment means to limit oneself in requirements, desires, or actions. That is what it basically means. Turn with me to this beautiful passage, Philippians chapter 4, verse 11. It says like this: I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I've learned to be content whatever the circumstance. One of the first things that we have to realize when it comes to contentment or being content is that we have to realize that you and I are not going to have everything that we want. When you look at this passage, we see this in the life of Paul the apostle. He's writing from a prison in Rome, not from a palace, not from a place of luxury, but he's writing from a prison in Rome, and he's saying these words: I've learned to be content, whatever the situation. If you look at his life, if you see what he's going through, he's in jail, he's under house arrest. There's not much freedom. Resources are limited. People have deserted him. If you read 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, you'll get to know that he talks about people who have deserted him. There were people who got to know that Paul is in jail for the sake of preaching Christ and the gospel, so they deserted him, because if they would join with him, they will also be put in prison. He also had health issues, and it is very likely that he lacked resources to take care of himself. So when the church at Philippi heard that Paul is in jail, is in the prison at Rome, they sent him a lot of gifts through a man called Epaphroditus. So Paul writes a letter to them, thanking them for the generous gift. He says, I thank you for everything that you've done, but I want you to know something. If you go to Philippians chapter 4, verse 10, he says like this: I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you had concern, but had no opportunity to show it. He's thanking them, saying, I'm glad you did this for me. But he says, I want you to know something. Verse 11, he says, I'm not saying this because I'm in need. He's writing like this, saying, I'm not saying this because I'm in need. And then he goes on to say, for I've learned to be content whatever the circumstance. He's saying, hey, I'm glad that you sent these things for me. I'm glad that you had this opportunity to show your love towards me, your concern towards me. But I want you to know something. I've learned to be content. I've learned to be content. Now we must understand what this exactly means in the context here. Because when we think of being content, we may often think of disciplining ourselves, abolishing our desires, doing things like telling ourselves, we can't do this, we can't do that, we have to limit our expenses. We basically think that we should do all things to subdue ourselves so that we don't desire for more. But can I tell you something? That's not what Paul is talking about. He's talking about something else. He's not saying, I've disciplined myself, I've brought all my desires under control so that I feel content with whatever I have. That's not what he's talking about, but he's talking about something else. If you go to verse 12, he says like this: I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. And then he goes on to say, make this beautiful statement: I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. What is Paul saying? I've learned the secret. He's not saying I've mastered my will and desires and I've subdued myself. I don't have any desires. He's not talking about a state of life where, he's lost all emotions and touch with reality. No, he knows that he has needs, but he's learned to be content. He's learned the secret. Now, what is that secret? What is that secret? If you go back to the 1st century AD, around the time of Paul, there were a group of people called the Stoics. And these were ancient philosophers who followed Stoicism. Stoicism is a school of thought that was founded in Athens by Zeno of Citium. It was around 300 BC, that is a couple of hundred years before Jesus was born. So these people taught how to be content. The Stoics taught how to be content. This is what they said. They said, if you want to be content, eliminate all your desires. What should you do? Eliminate all your desires. The Stoics believed that the only way to contentment is to abolish all desires until a stage has been reached where you don't feel you need anything. Like nothing is essential to life. Suppose if you don't have a brush to brush your teeth, they will look for a branch or something. They felt like even the necessary things are not needed. You have to abolish your desires to that level. They also taught saying, eliminate all emotion. eliminate all emotion until people had reached a stage where they did not care what happened to them. So they taught saying, begin with a cup. You have a beautiful, let's say imagine this is a glass cup. Beautiful. Drop it. Let it break. And then say, I don't care. Maybe your pet falls sick and passes away. Say, I don't care. Maybe a loved one passes away or something bad happens to you. Say, I don't care. They taught people to abolish emotions, care, empathy, and love for one another so that you can reach a stage where you can be content. The Stoic aim was to abolish every feeling of the human heart. That's what they taught. And they also taught one more thing that will sound very Christian. They said, everything is the will of God, which is true. They said, everything is the will of God. So they said, everything that happens in your life, the good and the bad, is all the will of God. So don't fight with it. If you lack something, maybe that's the will of God. Don't fight with it. Don't struggle with God. Just let it be as it is. That's what they taught. So they said, in order to achieve contentment, abolish desire, abolish emotion, root out love from your life. Caring was forbidden. A scholar of the ancient history and New Testament said like this, the Stoics made of the heart a desert and called it peace. What did they do with their heart? They made it a desert and called that a peaceful place. But Paul is not talking about that here. If you go to what the Stoics are talking about, they're saying abolish desires, abolish emotions, and see everything as a will of God. The Stoics spoke about being self-sufficient, but Paul spoke of being God-sufficient. I want you to understand the difference here. They spoke of abolishing your desires, eliminating everything. They spoke of self-sufficiency. But Paul spoke of being God-sufficient. You see the difference there? That's what he's saying. I've learned the secret. The Stoics spoke about abolishing desires, emotions, love, compassion from the human heart. But this man writes saying, I have set my eyes on the mountain from where my help comes from.